The strong October wind whipped against Morgan Hayes' face as she drove her Jeep along the coastal road in Virginia Beach. At 28, Lieutenant Hayes had already served 6 years as a medic in the United States Navy, currently stationed at the Naval Hospital in Portsmouth. It wasn't what she had imagined as a child growing up in rural Kentucky, but after a medical school scholarship and a desire to serve her country, a military career had become her calling. The vehicle's headlights cut through the darkness of that Thursday night. Morgan was exhausted after a double shift at the hospital, where a series of training exercises had brought in dozens of sailors with simulated injuries to test the medical team's response. Her eyes burned with fatigue, but she knew a deep sleep awaited her in her apartment, located just 20 minutes away. The rain began to fall in heavy drops against the windshield, and Morgan adjusted the wipers to maximum speed. It was then that her eyes caught a strange glint at the side of the road, red taillights that seemed submerged in a small incline. Instinctively, she slowed down. "Damn it," she muttered to herself, slowing down even more to get a better look. There was no doubt. A car had left the road and partially rolled into a drainage ditch. The lights were still on, which meant the accident must have happened recently. Morgan didn't think twice. She pulled her Jeep over to the side of the road, turned on her hazard lights, and grabbed her emergency medical kit that she always kept in the back seat, a habit her colleagues sometimes mocked, but which she considered essential. The rain intensified as she exited the vehicle, and mud quickly soaked her military boots. With her cell phone flashlight illuminating the path, Morgan carefully descended the embankment to the wrecked car, a dark blue sedan now resting precariously, with the driver's side partially submerged in murky water. "Hello? Can anyone hear me?" Morgan called out, cautiously approaching. "I'm a doctor. I'm here to help." A low groan came from inside the vehicle. Morgan quickened her pace, mentally calculating the risks. The car seemed stable for now, but the water kept rising with the rain. She needed to act quickly. Upon reaching the driver's side door, Morgan saw a woman of approximately 60 years old, trapped by her seatbelt. Blood was trickling from a cut on her forehead, and her left arm was in an unnatural position. "Ma'am, can you hear me? My name is Morgan. I'm a Navy doctor. I'm going to get you out of there." The woman mumbled something incomprehensible, her unfocused eyes suggesting a possible concussion. Morgan tested the door, but it was jammed. The window glass, however, had shattered during the impact. "I'll need to go this way, okay? Stay as still as possible," Morgan instructed, even knowing that the woman probably couldn't fully process her words. Carefully, Morgan removed the remaining shards of glass and crept partially inside the vehicle. The water was already knee-deep. She quickly checked the woman's vital signs: weak but present pulse, irregular breathing, pupils reacting slowly to light. There was no one else in the car. Morgan reached for the seatbelt button and released it, holding the woman to prevent her from slipping further. The car's interior was becoming increasingly flooded. "I'm gonna get you out of here now. It might hurt a little, but we need to get out before the water rises any higher," Morgan explained, more to herself than to the semi-conscious victim. With a strength that would have surprised anyone who saw her slender frame, Morgan pulled the woman out of the vehicle through the broken window. Years of military training and medical practice in extreme conditions had prepared her body for this kind of exertion. Even so, her muscles protested as she carried the unconscious woman uphill through the slippery mud and merciless rain. Upon reaching his Jeep, Morgan opened the rear door and carefully placed the woman in the seat. He quickly performed a more thorough assessment. In addition to the concussion and possibly broken arm, the woman had several fractured ribs and incipient hypothermia. Morgan turned the heater to maximum and wrapped the patient in the emergency blanket he kept in the trunk. While stabilizing the woman's arm with an improvised splint, Morgan grabbed her phone and called emergency services, reporting the accident and requesting an ambulance. Then, as protocol dictates, she checked the woman's bag for identification. Eleanor Winters, 62 years old, he murmured upon finding the woman's wallet. There was also an emergency card listing allergies and a contact, Christopher Winters' son. Morgan wrote down the number and, after a moment of hesitation, decided to call. After all, if it were her mother, she would want to be informed immediately. After 3 rings, a male voice answered. "Hello? Senior Winters? Christopher Winters? Yes, Hooge speaking. My name is Lieutenant Morgan Hayes. I'm a Navy medic. I found your mother, Eleanor, at a car accident on the coastal highway. She's alive, but she needs hospital care. I've already called an ambulance. There was a moment of shocked silence on the other end of the line, followed by a barrage of questions. Morgan responded with the professional calm she had developed over the years, explaining Eleanor's condition without causing unnecessary panic. She informed them that the ambulance was on its way and would take Eleanor to the Naval Hospital in Portsmouth, where Morgan worked. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, said Christopher, his voice trembling. Before she could answer, Morgan saw the ambulance lights approaching. "I need to hang up now. The ambulance is here. See you at the hospital." The paramedics arrived, and Morgan immediately relayed the relevant medical information while they prepared Eleanor for transport. When asked if she would like to accompany them, Morgan nodded. Although her apartment and her bed called to her, her sense of responsibility prevailed. She had found Eleanor, and she wanted to ensure the transfer to the hospital went smoothly. In the ambulance, Morgan watched as the paramedics worked, supplementing their actions when necessary. Eleanor occasionally regained consciousness, murmuring incoherent words. On one of these occasions, she gripped Morgan's hand with surprising force. "Jason?" Eleanor murmured. "Is Jason all right?" Morgan exchanged glances with the paramedic. There was no one else in the car when she arrived. "Mrs. Winters, you were alone in the car when I found you," Morgan explained gently. "Was there anyone else with you?" Eleanor looked confused for a moment, then her eyes widened in panic. "My grandson, Jason, was in the back seat, coming back from swimming lessons." Morgan's heart. She hadn't checked the back seat thoroughly. With the water rising and darkness falling, could she have lost someone? "How old is Jason?" she asked urgently. 8, Eleanor whispered before losing consciousness again. Morgan turned to the ambulance driver. "We need to go back to the accident site. There might still be a child there. We can't divert with a critically ill patient," the driver replied. "I'll request another unit to check." But Morgan knew that every minute counted if there really was a child trapped in that partially submerged car. He made a quick decision. Continue to the hospital. "I'll call my colleagues at the base and return to the scene," she said, already typing on her phone. Eleanor was now in good hands, and Morgan couldn't live with herself if she didn't check on her personally. As soon as they arrived at the hospital, Morgan helped transfer Eleanor to the emergency, relaying all the relevant information. Then, without wasting any time, she borrowed an emergency vehicle from the hospital and drove back to the scene of the accident. Sirens blaring and her heart racing. When she arrived, the rain had eased slightly, but the ditch was still more full of water. Eleanor's car was almost completely submerged now. Morgan grabbed a more powerful flashlight from the emergency vehicle and went back down the embankment, calling out the boy's name. "Jason! Jason! Can you hear me?" Silence. Morgan felt a knot in her stomach. What if the child had been trapped underwater this whole time? She illuminated the interior of the car, now almost completely flooded. The back seat seemed empty, but there was a child seat strapped in. Morgan took a deep breath and partially submerged herself in the icy water to get a better look. That's when she noticed something. A small red sneaker floating near the roof of the car. Morgan dove completely under, ignoring the biting cold of the water. Groping in the darkness, her fingers found fabric, then a small leg. With desperate effort, she pulled the motionless body of a child out of the air pocket that had formed on the roof of the overturned vehicle. Emerging from the water with Jason in her arms, Morgan immediately checked his vital signs. The boy wasn't breathing. His skin was bluish. Without hesitation, Morgan carried him to the flatter bank and began resuscitation procedures. Years of training took over as she alternated between chest compressions and mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, mentally counting and monitoring the time. "Come on, Jason. Breathe," Morgan murmured between resuscitation cycles. "Breathe for me, kid." After what seemed like an eternity, but was only 2 minutes, Jason coughed violently, expelling water. Morgan quickly turned him on his side, allowing the water to drain from his lung. He began to cry weak, a sound that was music to Morgan's ears. "It's okay, Jason. My name is Morgan. I'm a doctor. Your grandmother is fine, and you will be too," she said gently, wrapping him in the thermal blanket from her emergency bag. Morgan carried Jason to the emergency vehicle and carefully placed him in the seat. He turned the heater back on and began a secondary assessment. In addition to hypothermia and near drowning, the boy had a cut on his leg and possibly a mild concussion, but his vital signs were stabilizing. "My grandmother," Jason murmured, shivering under the blanket. "She's in the hospital, being well taken care of," Morgan assured as he drove back to the Naval Hospital, this time with sirens and lights blaring. "Her father is on his way too. Dad's going to be mad," Jason whispered. He told Grandma not to drive at night. Morgan smiled despite the situation. "I'm sure he's only worried about the two of you." Upon arriving at the hospital, Morgan carried Jason inside, shouting instructions to the emergency team as he went in. Within minutes, the boy was being treated by specialists, and Morgan could finally breathe. That's when she noticed her appearance. Her clothes were soaked and covered in mud. Her hair, which she normally kept tied up in a perfect military virus, was stuck to her face in wet strands. She left trails of water across the pristine white floor of the hospital. "Lieutenant Hayes?" Morgan turned to find a tall man, approximately 35 years old, with red eyes and a distressed expression. "Christopher Winters." "Mr. Winters," she nodded, trying to appear more presentable than she actually was. "Your mother is in the operating room. She has a broken arm that needs to be set, but her condition is stable." "And Jason?" Christopher asked, his voice breaking. "The nurse said you found my son too?" Morgan nodded. "Yes, he was in the back seat. I managed to get him out of the car and resuscitate. He's being treated for hypothermia and near drowning, but he's a strong kid. He'll be fine." Christopher covered his face with his hands, letting out a sob of relief. When he looked at Morgan again, his eyes were full of gratitude. "You saved my entire family. How can I thank you?" "Just doing my job, sir," Morgan replied automatically, the Navy mantra slipping out without thinking. "No," Christopher insisted. "You went above and beyond the call of duty. You went back to get my son when no one else noticed he was there. I can't even imagine... He was interrupted by a doctor who came to inform him that he could see Jason now. Christopher hesitated, clearly torn between seeing his son and continuing to thank the woman who had saved his family. "Go," Morgan said softly. "I'll be around if you need me." As Christopher walked away, Morgan felt exhaustion hit her like a wave. She staggered slightly, holding onto the wall for balance. "Lieutenant Hayes, are you all right?" asked a passing nurse. Morgan nodded automatically. "Yes, I just need to change my clothes. There are extra uniforms in the doctor's closet," the nurse offered, looking worriedly at Morgan's soaked clothes. "Thank you," Morgan murmured, heading to the locker room. A hot shower and dry clothes sounded like paradise at that moment. 20 minutes later, wearing a set of dry scrubs and with her damp hair tied in a ponytail, Morgan returned to the emergency ward to check on the Winters before finally heading home. That's when she heard the commotion. A woman of approximately 30 years old was at the nurse's counter, her voice loud and demanding. "I want to speak to the doctor in charge of my nephew, Jason Winters, immediately," the woman demanded. "How can you allow a child with hypothermia to be left without a proper blanket and the bandage on? His leg is leaking. What kind of incompetent military hospital is this?" Morgan approached cautiously. The nurse at reception looked exhausted and intimidated. "Ma'am, can I help you?" Morgan asked, keeping her voice calm and professional. The woman turned, her eyes flashing with indignation. "Are you a doctor here? Well, perhaps you can explain why my nephew is being neglected in this place. I'm Lieutenant Morgan Hayes. I was the one who found Jason and his grandmother at the accident site and brought them here," Morgan explained patiently. The woman examined her from head to toe, her critical gaze sweeping over Morgan's simple hospital uniform and makeup-free face. "You? A girl who looks like she's barely out of college? It's hard to believe the Navy would entrust lives to someone so... young." Morgan took a deep breath, used to this kind of prejudice. At 28, with her average height and delicate feet, she was frequently underestimated by patients and family members. "I am 28 years old and have 6 years of experience as a naval doctor, ma'am. I can assure you that Jason is receiving the best possible care." "Well, that's not what it looks like," the woman retorted. "I just saw my nephew shivering under a thin blanket. He almost drowned. And where was that wonderful medical assistance when my mother decided to drive during a storm with my nephew in the car?" "Sarah, that's enough," came Christopher's firm voice from behind them. He approached, looking exhausted but determined. Lieutenant Hayes saved Jason and Mom's lives. She went back to the accident site to look for Jason after Mom mentioned he was in the car. She resuscitated him when he wasn't breathing anymore. Sarah seemed momentarily speechless. Her eyes moved from Christopher to Morgan, the distrust still present, but now mixed with confusion. What? Jason was trapped in the submerged car, Christopher explained, his voice choked with emotion. Lieutenant Hayes dove into the water to get him out. If it weren't for her, we would have lost our boy. Morgan looked away, uncomfortable with the compliment. Anyone would have done the same, he muttered. No, they wouldn't have, Christopher insisted. The ambulance wouldn't come back. No one else noticed Jason was there. Sarah stared at Morgan with a completely transformed expression. You resurrected him? Morgan nodded silently. He's a strong boy. He fought to come back. Tears began to stream down Sarah's face. I didn't know. I thought you had only found him with my mother. The information was still being processed, Morgan explained diplomatically. Don't worry about it. The important thing is that Jason is getting better. I can personally check if he needs additional blankets or a new dressing. Double quotes. Sarah hesitated, then extended her hand. I'm sorry, Lieutenant. I was scared and worried. Thank you for saving my family. Morgan squeezed her hand briefly, offering a tired smile. That's what we're here for. In the days that followed, Morgan divided his time between his regular duties and visits to the Winters. Eleanor had undergone successful surgery to fix her broken arm and was slowly recovering from the concussion. Jason, resilient as only children can be, was already sitting on the bed telling animated stories about how a mermaid doctor had saved him from the dark waters. On Sunday morning, when Morgan entered Jason's room for a quick check before his shift began, he found the entire Winters family gathered. Christopher, his wife Rachel, Sarah, and her husband, and even Eleanor in a wheelchair were all gathered around Jason's bed. Lieutenant Hayes, Jason exclaimed when he saw her, his face lighting up with a smile. We were talking about you. Good things, I hope, Morgan joked, automatically checking Jason's vital signs. The best, Christopher assured him, standing up. Actually, we have a surprise for you. Morgan raised her eyebrows. Curiously? A surprise? Rachel stepped forward, holding an envelope. It's a formal invitation, actually. Jason is being discharged tomorrow, and we're planning a small family celebration next weekend. We'd love for you to join us. Morgan took the envelope, genuinely touched. In her years as a military medic, she had treated hundreds of patients, saved many lives, but rarely formed connections that lasted beyond recovery. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Jason insisted. Mom's baking chocolate cake, and Grandma said she's going to make that special pasta everyone loves. Eleanor smiled tremulously from her wheelchair. It's the least we can do, dear. Not only did you save us, but you've been visiting us every day. You already feel like part of the family. Morgan felt a lump in her throat. Family was a complicated concept for her. Growing up in rural Kentucky with frequently absent parents, her father working double shifts in the coal mine, and her mother doing the same. In a sewing factory, Morgan had learned to be independent from an early age. The Navy had become her surrogate family, offering structure and purpose, but there were times when she deeply felt the lack of personal connections. I would be honored, she finally replied, her voice softer than usual. Sarah, who had become surprisingly friendly after the initial confrontation, smiled. Great. And don't worry about taking anything but yourself. We're eternally indebted to you. Actually, Christopher added, there's something else we want to discuss with you, but it can wait until the celebration. Morgan raised an eyebrow, intrigued, but didn't press the issue. Finishing her quick examination of Jason, she promised to return later and continued her rounds. The rest of the week passed in a blur of long shifts and preparations for a training mission the Navy was organizing. Morgan had almost forgotten about the Winters invitation by the time Saturday arrived. It was only when he was leaving the hospital after a particularly grueling shift that he remembered the celebration. For a moment, she considered calling to apologize. She was exhausted, and the idea of social interaction seemed overwhelming. But the hopeful expression on Jason's face when he handed her the invitation weighed on her. With a sigh, Morgan drove to her apartment, took a quick shower, and changed out of her uniform into jeans, a simple blouse, and a light jacket. The Winters house was exactly as Morgan had imagined, a cozy suburban home with a well-kept garden and toys scattered across the front lawn. When Morgan parked his Jeep out front, Jason came running out the door, waving enthusiastic. "Lieutenant Hayes, you've come!" Morgan smiled, feeling her weariness lessen somewhat at the boy's enthusiasm. Of course, a promise is a promise. Christopher appeared in the doorway, waving a welcome. "Morgan, come in, please. Everyone is eager to see you." Inside the house, Morgan was greeted with surprising warmth by the extended Winters family. Eleanor, still with her arm in a cast but looking much better, embraced her with tears in her eyes. Sarah offered her a glass of wine with a genuine smile that showed no trace of her previous hostility. The evening progressed pleasantly, with delicious food, light conversation, and frequent laughter. Morgan, usually reserved, surprised herself by genuinely enjoying the company. When dessert was served, the promised chocolate cake that had Jason jumping for joy, Christopher asked for everyone. "As you know, we're here not only to celebrate Mom and Jason's recovery, but also to express our gratitude to the person who made it possible," he began, raising his glass toward Morgan. Morgan felt her face grow hot. "Really, it's not necessary. Double quotes, yes, it is," Eleanor interrupted gently. "You risked your life for us, dear. That deserves recognition." Christopher nodded. "And that's why we want to make an announcement. Rachel and I talked about it a lot, and also with Mom and Sarah. Jason was consulted too." Of course, Jason nodded solemnly, though his face betrayed barely contained excitement. "As you may know, Morgan, our family runs a small but growing foundation that provides scholarships to medical students who commit to working in underserved communities after graduation," Christopher explained. Morgan nodded. Eleanor had mentioned something about that during her hospital visits. "Well, we've decided to create a new scholarship in his name, the Lieutenant Morgan Hayes Scholarship for Emergency Medicine. It will be awarded annually to a student who demonstrates exceptional dedication to service and skills in emergency situations." Morgan was speechless, a rare occurrence for someone so articulate. "And there's more," Sarah added. "We would like to invite you to be part of the selection committee if you are interested. We know your time is limited with your duties in the Navy, but your perspective would be invaluable." I don't know what to say," Morgan finally managed to reply, his voice strangely choked. "That's extraordinarily generous. It's the least we can do," Rachel said gently. "You not only saved Jason and Eleanor, but you showed us the true meaning of going above and beyond the call of duty." Jason, unable to contain himself any longer, exclaimed, "And now other people can be heroes like you, Lieutenant Hayes." The room erupted in hearty laughter, and Morgan felt something unusual, a sense of belonging that she rarely experienced outside of her work. Later that night, while Morgan was helping Eleanor tidy up the kitchen, ignoring the older woman's protests that a guest shouldn't be working, Eleanor gently touched her arm. "You know, when I woke up in that ambulance and you were there, I thought you were an angel," Eleanor confessed with a smile. "And then, when you went back to save Jason, something no one else thought to do, I was sure of it." Morgan shook his head, uncomfortable with the compliment. "I just did what any decent person would do." "No, darling. What you did was extraordinary. And what's most extraordinary is that you don't even realize it." Eleanor gently squeezed Morgan's arm with her good hand. "Do you have any idea how rare it is to find someone who risks everything for strangers?" Morgan looked away, unsure how to respond. Her training in the Navy had always emphasized duty, responsibility, and sacrifice. This didn't seem exceptional to her. When I accused him at the hospital, Sarah's voice came from the kitchen doorway, making Morgan turn around. "It was because I couldn't believe that someone so young could be competent enough to properly take care of my family." Morgan smiled ironically. "It's not the first time I've heard something like that. But then Christopher told me what you really did," Sarah continued, entering the kitchen. "How you went back to that submerged car alone. How you risked your own life without hesitation. How you brought Jason back when he had already stopped breathing." Eleanor nodded, her eyes shining with emotion. "When I found out you'd come back for Jason after saving me, Well, I realized I'd misjudged not only you, but an entire generation. Morgan chuckled softly. I think that's a compliment? The greatest, Sarah confessed. You didn't just save our lives, Lieutenant. You changed our perspective. And for that, we are doubly grateful. At the end of the night, when Morgan finally said goodbye, it was with heartfelt promises to stay in touch. Jason insisted on a tight hug, whispering that when he grew up, he wanted to be brave like Lieutenant Hayes. Christopher and Rachel formally invited her to Thanksgiving dinner, still a few weeks away. Sarah gave her a card with details about the foundation and the new scholarship program. When Morgan drove back to her apartment, she didn't feel the tiredness that normally overwhelmed her after prolonged social interactions. Instead, she felt strangely energized, as if something fundamental had changed. In her apartment, Morgan automatically checked her work messages, a habit her colleagues always criticized as being overly dedicated. There was an email from her superior informing her that she had been nominated for an Exceptional Service Award for her actions during the winter's rescue. Apparently, the paramedics had reported the incident, and the story had traveled up the chain of command. Morgan smiled to herself, closing her laptop without replying. The professional recognition was gratifying, but somehow, the Thanksgiving invitation stuck to her refrigerator seemed like a much bigger prize. As she prepared for bed, Morgan reflected on how a single rainy night had altered the course of several lives, not only Eleanor and Jason's, who would have died without her intervention, but also her own. For years, she had defined her worth solely by her military service and medical skills. Now, for the first time, she felt valued not only for what she did, but for who she was. The following Monday, while Morgan was making her morning rounds at the hospital, a nurse approached her with a package wrapped in colorful paper. Special delivery, Lieutenant. The nurse smiled. They left it at reception for you. Intrigued, Morgan opened the package and found a handcrafted picture frame, clearly made by child's hands, decorated with painted seashells and starfish. Inside, there was a drawing of a woman in a Navy uniform holding the hand of a small boy with blue waves in the background. At the bottom of the drawing, in large, irregular letters, it read, "My heroine, Lieutenant Morgan Hayes," and signed with love, Jason Winters, age 8. Morgan felt a lump in her throat as she carefully placed the framed photograph in her locker in the doctor's lounge. She was used to saving lives. It was her job, after all. But she rarely had the opportunity to see the lasting impact of her actions, to form connections that transcended the doctor-patient relationship. That night, when he finally drove home after another long shift, Morgan didn't take his usual route. Instead, almost without thinking, he drove along the coastal highway, passing the spot where he had found Eleanor's car on that fateful night. Pulling over to the side of the road, Morgan got out of the car and looked at the drainage ditch, now calm and almost dry after several days without rain. It was hard to imagine that this ordinary place had been the scene of such dramatic events just a week before. The sun was setting over the ocean in the distance, painting the sky in shades of orange. Morgan took a deep breath of the salty air, feeling a strange sense of peace settle over her. For years, he had wondered if he had made the right choice in joining the Navy instead of pursuing a more lucrative civilian career. He had questioned whether sacrificing a stable personal life for service was worthwhile. At that moment, looking at the spot where she had almost lost Jason but managed to bring him back, Morgan had no more doubts. This was exactly where she should be, doing exactly what she should be doing. With one last glance at the sunset, Morgan returned to his Jeep. In his pocket, the Winters Thanksgiving invitation seemed to burn softly, a reminder that sometimes families are formed. She appeared in the most unexpected places and at the most unexpected times, and for that, she was deeply grateful.